You mentioned China. So many of us assume that the Biden administration will reduce the bellicose attitude displayed during the Trump years. That does not seem to be the case. What, in your view, explains the American shift in seeing China as a somewhat of a partner in corporate-led globalization from the 1980s onwards to viewing it as a grave threat today?
You're quite right. The Biden administration selected a very hawkish group of national security advisors who are raising tensions with China, carrying out provocative acts, all presented in the United States as an effort to counter the China threat. Raises a question. What exactly is the China threat? Lots you can condemn in China. Their behavior in Xinjiang province, fortification of islands in South China Sea in violation of international orders. Lots you can condemn. Is it a threat to the United States? The so-called threats are all either in China or on the borders of China. Actually, this question is raised, not in the United States much, but in Australia, right in the claws of the dragon. The distinguished statesman, former Prime Minister Paul Keating, recently wrote in the Australian press about what is the China threat. He went through the various arguments, showed quite easily that they are built on sand, and he concluded that the China threat is that China exists. I think that's correct. China exists. It is not subordinate to the United States. It cannot be intimidated by the United States. It's not like Europe. And that's unacceptable. If you're the global dominant hegemon, the mafia don, basically, you can't accept successful defiance. We have many examples of that. So take the most obvious and dramatic of them. For 60 years, the United States has been torturing Cuba. Major terrorist wars sponsored by the Kennedy administration, one of the things that led to the missile crisis, an embargo so severe that it's in fact a blockade, constant torture of Cuba because of the Cuban threat. And what exactly is the Cuban threat? Well, one good thing about the United States, very good, is it's quite an open society, much more than others. So we have access, substantial access, to internal government documents from the 1960s. And the State Department explains the Cuba threat. I'm quoting it now, Castro's successful defiance of US policies going back to the 1820s, 1823, the Monroe Doctrine, when the US government established its goal of dominating the hemisphere. Couldn't carry it out at the time. Britain was much too powerful. But that was the intent. The United States should dominate the hemisphere. Castro is carrying out successful defiance of this principle. And that's intolerable. Well, on a much larger scale, China is carrying out successful defiance of the US policies since World War II of attempting to rule the world. And China's not Europe. When the United States imposes sanctions on Iran, let's say, Europe doesn't like it. They're opposed to it, but they obey. When the US imposes a blockade of Cuba, Europe's opposed, votes against it at the United Nations, but it obeys. They live in fear of the Godfather. They don't step on his toes. When the United States gives orders, Europe obeys. Most of the rest of the world does too. China doesn't. Not only that, but it can't be intimidated. Well, as Paul Keating said, that's unacceptable. That's the China threat. It's not, again, there's plenty to condemn in China's behavior, but to try to find the threat, I think Paul Keating is correct.